Welcome back. The Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency at DHS says all civilian agencies should start vulnerability disclosure programs. But asking the public to identify weak points could bring up more vulnerabilities than agencies are ready to respond to. Katie Moussouris is founder and CEO of Luta Security. She led the launch of the first bug bounty program at the Defense Department. She's writing about it in the Hill newspaper. Katie, thanks for coming on. What should the civilian agencies be doing that maybe DoD already has a head start on with the bug bounty programs like the ones you're involved with?
That's a great question. Well, they should immediately start assessing their maturity and capabilities and finding all of the gaps in their people, process, and technology. And they should ask Congress for more resources.
You write in this piece, one of my concerns is that any agency that includes too many targets in scope at once at the start of this program may have found that they've opened the floodgates. What's the risk of that for actually being able to solve problems, Katie?
Well, if you look at the federal government, who's currently struggling to investigate the SolarWinds and Microsoft Exchange hacks, a lot of those resources internally are shared resources with this vulnerability disclosure process. So if you think of it like a digestive system, things can get pretty messed up if you don't have the appropriate resources ready to go.
When you talk about resources, is that just money, or is that also people and the governance that's required to execute these programs?
It's a very specific process, and the people involved need special training to be able to handle these vulnerabilities appropriately. So it's more about getting the right cyber workforce in place, training them with the appropriate technology and the right way to respond to vulnerability reports, and keeping those helpful hackers coming with bug reports.
What's the training? What's the training that works? What's the skill set that the people in government will need to be able to respond to what people find?
You know, it's not just cybersecurity and engineering skills that folks need. They need detailed process-oriented skills. They need people skills. And this is a perfect opportunity to augment the cyber workforce of the United States government, which, you know, we're all shorthanded in the private sector as well.
What do you have? What does the private sector not have? What does the government not have that they need? And how do we grow more of that? I know that's not the subject of your piece, but that strikes me as the underlying issue here, is that if we don't have enough people to handle these issues broadly, that's something that is a fundamental weakness.
Well, certainly hacking skills come in handy, but knowing about those bugs and being able to hack into systems is pretty much half the battle. So we need folks who are willing to learn about defensive technology and some of what I call the dental hygiene of security. So it might not sound as exciting as hacking, but you know, myself starting out as a professional hacker, I assure you there are fulfilling jobs all across offense and defense, and those are the kinds of skills that we need ramped up in both the private sector and in the government.
You make 3 recommendations in this piece, and that is one of them, to build a long-term comprehensive plan to train, attract, and retain high-skilled cyber professionals into the federal workforce. You specify federal workforce in the piece. Why is it important that those are people who work for the federal government and not who work for contractors and the government buys that service?
Well, you can do some of these things with contractors. Certainly the initial triage can be done with contractors, but contractors aren't really going to be able to fully assess risk across the federal government like internal employees who are read into all of the weaknesses in the internal systems can do. And you need those folks to be highly trained and ready to go. And unfortunately, you know, we have a shortage of the cyber workforce in the private sector. So in the federal government space, we deal with a huge pay disparity that I think this administration needs to address in order to attract the kinds of workers that should be working in the federal government level internally.
Another of the recommendations in your piece is to begin gathering key performance data to inform a maturity assessment and gap analysis. What's the data that agencies should collect, and where should it be assembled? Is there one place that all that information should be gathered so that it can be analyzed enterprise-wide?
Well, some of the data that they should be gathering are things like what does it take in terms of time to repair things? What is the mean time to repair? How long does it take them to address issues that they scan for themselves? Do they actually have the ability to scan for vulnerabilities themselves, or are they relying on the public, which is a super inefficient way to find out about this information? And then as far as who should be collecting this information, well, DHS CISA is currently being set up to perform a central role in the vulnerability disclosure process and numerous other government cybersecurity processes. So I would suggest adding more resources there.
Third item that you're suggesting is that Congress should provide the appropriate budget resources. We talked about money earlier in our conversation, directly informed by those maturity gap reports. How does Congress link those two together? How do you direct the money to the right place?
Well, each agency is going to have different needs. It's going to depend on what their attack surface looks like, how many resources they already have in place, and how spent those resources are. So as each agency goes through a vulnerability maturity assessment and gap analysis, each one of them will have different needs and different recommendations to ask for from Congress.
Katie Moussouris, thanks very much for joining me. It's great to have you on the program.
Thank you so much.